They told us it was impossible. They said the land was dead. They claimed that without their money, their expertise, their permission, nothing could grow in the dying soils of West Africa. They were wrong, and the proof is growing right now, stretching across thousands of acres in a country most people can't even pronounce correctly. A green miracle so extraordinary that it's being hidden from the world's view by the very institutions that claim to care about our planet's future. What happened in Burkina Faso should be front-page news everywhere. Instead, it's the story they don't want you to know.
Imagine watching your entire world turn to dust. Not metaphorically, literally. Where rivers once flowed, now there's cracked earth. Where forests once stood, there's empty horizon. Where children once played under shade trees, there's nothing but the relentless African sun beating down on barren ground. This was Burkina Faso's reality, a landlocked nation in West Africa that had become the poster child for climate catastrophe. International reports labeled it severely degraded. Development agencies spoke about irreversible desertification. Climate scientists pointed to it as proof that some places were simply beyond saving. The numbers painted a grim picture. 60% of forest cover lost in 4 decades. Rainfall declining year after year. Wells going dry faster than communities could dig new ones. Young people abandoning villages their families had called home for generations. But something was happening beneath the surface that no outsider understood. In kitchens and community centers, around market stalls and after Friday prayers, the women of Burkina Faso were having conversations that would change everything. These weren't the conversations that international observers were listening to. Aid workers spoke with government officials and community leaders, almost always men. Researchers interviewed educated urban populations who could speak colonial languages. Journalists sought out dramatic stories that would capture international attention. Nobody was listening to the grandmothers who still remembered when the rains came predictably. Nobody consulted the women who had been adapting their farming practices to changing conditions for decades. Nobody asked the mothers who had been watching their children's future disappear whether they might have ideas about how to bring it back. That oversight would prove to be history's most expensive mistake. The captain who saw what others missed. Ibrahim Traore wasn't supposed to be a visionary. At 34, he was just another military officer in a region where coups happen like seasonal weather patterns. International media dismissed him as another strongman, another disruption to stability that would require outside management. But Traore understood something that escaped every foreign expert who had ever set foot in his country. The people who knew how to save Burkina Faso had been there all along. He had grown up watching his own grandmother cultivate impossible gardens during drought years, coaxing life from soil that agricultural experts had declared useless. He had seen his mother organize neighborhood women to share seeds and preserve traditional crop varieties that research institutions had abandoned for improved varieties that required expensive inputs most families couldn't afford. When he assumed power, Traore made a decision that shocked observers. Instead of seeking international support for conventional development programs, he would bet everything on the knowledge and determination of his own people. The announcement came during a national address that international media largely ignored. While the world debated his political legitimacy, Traore was launching the most ambitious environmental restoration project in modern African history. "We do not need the world's permission to heal our own land," he declared. "We do not need foreign experts to teach us how to grow trees in the soil our ancestors have worked for thousands of years. We need only the courage to trust ourselves." The plan was audacious beyond anything attempted before. Plant 5 million trees in a single day across every village in the country. No international funding, no foreign technical assistance, no elaborate monitoring systems designed by overseas consultants. Just seeds, tools, and the hands of people who had been written off as incapable of solving their own problems. June 15, 2025. Dawn broke across the Sahel like any other morning, but what unfolded over the next 24 hours would rewrite the rules of what was possible. Across 2,500 villages, as the first call to prayer echoed from minarets and church bells began their morning songs, something unprecedented began. Not a military operation or political rally, but a coordinated act of ecological resurrection involving hundreds of thousands of people. The logistics alone should have made it impossible. How do you distribute 5 million seedlings to remote villages with limited transportation infrastructure? How do you coordinate simultaneous action across a country where many communities have no electricity, no internet, no telephone service? The answer revealed the depth of social organization that foreign observers had never recognized. Village chiefs had been preparing for months, working with traditional women's cooperatives that had been managing community resources for generations. Islamic and Christian leaders had incorporated environmental stewardship into religious teaching, transforming tree planting from government policy into spiritual duty. Most remarkably, the project succeeded because it worked with existing social structures rather than trying to replace them with foreign models. In the village of Gorsi, 70-year-old Fatimata Ouedraogo had spent weeks preparing seedlings in her compound, drawing on knowledge passed down from her grandmother about which native species could survive in depleted soil. When the great day arrived, she led 23 women from her extended family to a degraded hillside that hadn't seen vegetation in over a decade. Working in the pre-dawn darkness to avoid the day's heat, they planted 847 seedlings in carefully prepared holes, each tree positioned according to traditional understanding of water flow and soil chemistry that no agricultural college had ever documented. Similar scenes played out across the country. In Dori, near the border with Niger, women sang traditional songs as they worked, the rhythms helping coordinate their movements and maintain morale through hours of intensive labor. In Gawa, in the south, Islamic women and Christian women worked side by side, united by shared commitment to their children's future, regardless of religious differences. By sunset, the impossible had been accomplished. 5 million trees planted in locations carefully selected using knowledge systems that predated colonial borders, international development theories, or climate science as currently practiced in Western universities. But the real miracle was yet to come. The science nobody expected. Within weeks, something began happening that contradicted every expert prediction about degraded tropical soils and ecosystem restoration timelines. Satellite imagery started showing changes. First, just tiny green dots, scattered across previously barren landscapes. Then patches. Then corridors of vegetation connecting fragments of surviving forest. Dr. Aminata Ouedraogo, a soil scientist at the University of Ouagadougou, had been skeptical of the project's ambitious timeline. Traditional reforestation takes decades to show measurable impact, she had warned. Degraded soils in semi-arid regions require extensive rehabilitation before they can support tree growth. 6 months later, her research team was documenting results that challenged fundamental assumptions about ecosystem restoration. We're measuring 15 to 20% increases in soil organic matter in areas where intensive planting occurred, she reported to increasingly amazed international colleagues. Water retention capacity has improved dramatically. We're seeing nitrogen fixation happening faster than our models predicted possible. More remarkably, the ecological changes were triggering cascade effects throughout the regional ecosystem. Bird species that hadn't been observed in the area for 15 years began returning. Insect diversity increased exponentially as flowering plants returned to landscapes that had been ecological deserts. Small mammals started re-establishing territories in areas where no suitable habitat had existed just months earlier. The secret lay in the integration of traditional ecological knowledge with focused community commitment. The women planting trees knew which species could survive in alkaline soils, which root systems could access deep groundwater, which plants could modify soil chemistry to create conditions for other species to establish. Most importantly, they cared about every single seedling in ways that no hired workforce could replicate. These weren't just trees. They were investments in their children's future, acts of faith and possibilities that experts had declared impossible. Here's where this story becomes truly disturbing. As evidence of Burkina Faso's unprecedented success mounted, international coverage diminished rather than increased. Think about how environmental news usually works. When disasters strike, cameras arrive within hours. When conservation projects launch in wealthy countries, they generate extensive media coverage. When celebrities or billionaires announce environmental initiatives, press releases multiply across global networks. But when African women achieve the largest successful reforestation project in recent history, using traditional knowledge and community organization, the response is silence. Not just lack of coverage, active suppression. International environmental organizations that had been documenting Burkina Faso's environmental degradation for decades suddenly stopped issuing reports about the region. Development agencies that had been seeking funding to address desertification in the Sahel stopped mentioning Burkina Faso in their appeals. Climate scientists studying ecosystem restoration in Africa somehow avoided researching the most successful restoration project happening on the continent. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental, and the reason is uncomfortable but obvious. Burkina Faso's success threatens the fundamental assumptions that justify a multi-billion-dollar international development industry. If African communities can solve complex environmental challenges using their own knowledge and resources, what justification exists for the elaborate apparatus of international intervention that has been built around African environmental problems? If traditional knowledge can achieve results that high-tech solutions cannot, What happens to the authority of experts who have built careers on dismissing indigenous approaches as primitive or ineffective? If women's leadership can accomplish what male-dominated international institutions have failed to do for decades, what does that say about the power structures that have controlled environmental policy and funding? The silence isn't accidental, it's strategic. The economic revolution nobody mentions. While environmental scientists document ecological restoration and political analysts debate sovereignty implications, an equally remarkable economic transformation has been unfolding quietly in villages across Burkina Faso. In Kaya, Mariam Sawadogo had spent 3 years depending on World Food Program distributions after drought destroyed her family's crops. Today, she manages a cooperative that sells vegetables, herbs, and fruit grown in forest gardens established on previously unusable land. The aid workers told us this soil was dead forever, she explains, holding rich black earth that now supports thriving vegetation. But our grandmothers taught us that earth never dies. It just sleeps. We knew how to wake it up. Her cooperative now provides food security for 47 families while generating surplus income that has allowed 12 children to continue their education beyond primary school. Similar stories are multiplying across the country as reforestation creates economic opportunities that didn't exist in the aid-dependent economy. The economic model emerging represents a fundamental alternative to conventional development approaches. Instead of integrating into global supply chains as low-cost producers, communities are creating diverse local economies based on sustainable use of restored natural resources. Tree nurseries that began as community projects have become profitable businesses. Women who once depended on food aid are now selling surplus produce in regional markets. Traditional healers are cultivating medicinal plants that generate income while serving community health needs. Most significantly, the economic benefits are rooted in productive work that serves long-term community interests rather than extractive industries that benefit external investors. Government economists estimate that reforestation has created over 50,000 direct jobs and countless indirect opportunities, but these numbers fail to capture the transformation in economic autonomy and community self-confidence. The individual stories behind Burkina Faso's transformation reveal the human dimension of what statisticians reduce to data points and policy analysts discuss in abstract terms. There's Aissata Kabore, who lost 2 children to malnutrition during successive drought years and now manages forest nurseries that supply seedlings to 7 neighboring villages. There's Zenabu Uedraogo, whose traditional knowledge of medicinal plants has made her an essential consultant to university researchers studying restored ecosystems. Each woman carries within her personal story the larger narrative of a continent that has been systematically underestimated by those claiming authority over its development. Their success has begun changing how they see themselves and how their communities value their contributions. No longer are they beneficiaries of programs designed by others. They are architects of transformation, leaders of change, creators of solutions that work, because they emerge from deep understanding of local conditions and needs. As Fatimata reflects on changes in her village since the Great Planting, her words capture something profound about what has been accomplished. Before, when development workers came, they saw us as problems to be solved. They photographed our difficulties to show donors how much we needed their help. Now, when visitors come, they see solutions. They see what we accomplished with our own knowledge and our own hands. This shift from object to subject, from problem to solution, represents a psychological transformation whose significance extends far beyond environmental restoration. Burkina Faso's success is triggering changes across Africa that international institutions are still struggling to comprehend. In Senegal, women's cooperatives have begun adapting Burkina Faso's community mobilization techniques to their own environmental challenges. In Mali, traditional authorities are incorporating reforestation into cultural festivals and religious observances. In Niger, communities are requesting technical exchanges with their Burkinabe counterparts to learn restoration methods appropriate for their ecological conditions. Perhaps most significantly, the African Union has begun developing continent-wide environmental policies based on successful African practice rather than imported models developed elsewhere. This represents a fundamental shift in how African institutions approach development challenges. For decades, policy discussions focused on implementing international best practices and attracting foreign investment. Burkina Faso's success has reintroduced the possibility of African solutions to African challenges. Young African environmental scientists who previously looked to European or American research for inspiration are now studying traditional ecological knowledge with the intensity once reserved for Western academic theories. Universities across the continent are developing curricula that center successful African environmental practice. The psychological impact may prove even more significant than the practical applications. Burkina Faso has demonstrated that African communities possess not just the capacity for self-transformation, but the wisdom to pursue development models that serve human flourishing rather than external economic interests. What's happening in Burkina Faso has implications that extend far beyond environmental restoration or African development. It represents proof that many of the world's most pressing challenges might have solutions that already exist within the communities most affected by those challenges. Climate change, food insecurity, rural poverty, environmental degradation, these are treated as complex problems requiring sophisticated interventions designed by experts and implemented through elaborate institutional mechanisms. Burkina Faso suggests a different approach. Trust communities with resources and authority to implement solutions based on their own knowledge and priorities. This model threatens established power structures not because it's radical, but because it works. It demonstrates that many problems attributed to community incapacity were actually problems of communities being prevented from implementing their own solutions. The implications extend to environmental policy worldwide. If traditional knowledge can achieve restoration results that high-tech approaches cannot, environmental movements might need to fundamentally reconsider their assumptions about what kinds of expertise matter most. If community-controlled development can generate more sustainable economic benefits than market-driven approaches, development institutions might need to acknowledge that their interventions have often been counterproductive. If women's leadership can accomplish what male-dominated institutions have failed to do, power structures across multiple sectors might need to be reimagined. As 2026 approaches, Captain Traore's vision extends far beyond the remarkable achievements already documented. The goal is no longer just restoration but transformation, proving that African solutions can address challenges that affect communities worldwide. The next phase involves expanding successful methods to neighboring countries facing similar environmental challenges. Technical exchanges are being organized with communities in Mali, Niger, and Senegal. Traditional ecological knowledge is being documented and shared through networks that prioritize African intellectual sovereignty. New infrastructure is being developed to support long-term sustainability of restored ecosystems. Solar-powered irrigation systems ensure young trees survive dry seasons. Community-managed seed banks preserve genetic diversity of native species. Training programs create career paths that keep young people in rural areas rather than forcing migration to overcrowded cities. International scientific institutions, unable to ignore the success indefinitely, have begun requesting permission to study Burkina Faso's methods. But collaboration is being managed on terms that respect African intellectual property and contribute to African scientific capacity rather than extracting knowledge for external benefit. We welcome genuine partnership, Traore explained recently, but we will not allow our success to be colonized by those who claimed our challenges were unsolvable. What began with 10,000 women planting trees has evolved into something far more significant, a demonstration that communities possess both the capacity for self-transformation and the wisdom to pursue development models that prioritize human flourishing over external profit. The women of Burkina Faso have planted more than trees. They have planted a new narrative about community agency, about the relationship between environmental restoration and human dignity, about the power of knowledge that has been systematically undervalued by those claiming expertise about African development. Their revolution continues spreading, despite institutional attempts at suppression. It grows despite lack of mainstream coverage. It thrives because success has power that no amount of silence can contain. From the restored soils of the Sahel to the spreading canopy of new forests, Burkina Faso has proven something the world desperately needs to understand. The solutions to our most pressing challenges may already exist within the communities most affected by those challenges. The women who made this transformation possible carry within their success a message for every community facing seemingly impossible challenges. The knowledge you need may already exist within your own traditions, your own experience, your own commitment to creating change. As children now play in shade that their grandmothers couldn't have imagined, as rain falls on landscapes that had been written off as permanently degraded, as women count seeds for tomorrow's planting, the message becomes unmistakable. Another world is possible. Not the world promised by international conferences or development programs, but the world that emerges when communities are trusted with their own transformation, when traditional knowledge is valued alongside innovation, when those closest to problems are empowered to create solutions. The forest of Burkina Faso stands as living proof that transformation doesn't require permission from those who benefit from existing problems. It doesn't require elaborate institutional mechanisms designed by people who have never lived with the consequences of the challenges they claim to understand. It requires only the courage to plant hope and the commitment to nurture it, with unwavering faith in our own capacity to create the change we need to see. This is not just Burkina Faso's story. This is not just Africa's story. This is the story of what becomes possible when we stop waiting for others to solve our problems and start implementing the solutions that have been within our reach all along. The seeds are in our hands. The knowledge is in our communities. The future is growing in the spaces where we choose to plant it. And in villages across West Africa, 10,000 women are proving that the revolution the world needs doesn't require anyone's permission. It requires only the decision to begin.